Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar presented by ANAB. Today's webinar is on AS6171 Counterfeit Electronics Testing and ISO IEC 17025 Accreditation. My name is David Feist. I will be your facilitator today, and our presenter is Mark Farnbaugh. I will give you a little bit of information about him in a minute. Some of the logistics for our webinar today. All attendees today will be muted. Uh, if you have questions, we ask that you submit these questions via the Q&A box. These will be presented to Mark Farnbaugh, and he will address those as we go along. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Mark. Mark studied chemistry at Purdue University and began his career as a chemical process engineer for Magnavox / Hughes Electronics as a defense electronics contractor. He then evolved into a failure analyst doing failure analysis of electronic components and assemblies, as well as metallurgical and materials related testing. He's been involved in the IPC technical organization as the chairman of the Rework Simulation Technical Group for developing standards that are still used today. He then moved on to the Dana Corporation for their Spicer Axle World Headquarters Technical Center, where he managed their 17025 accredited metallurgical lab, overseeing day-to-day materials testing, as well as participating in research and development for this Tier 1 automotive supplier. He then moved on to Lincoln Manufacturing, where he managed the R&D laboratory. And during this time, he included life testing of developed products, energy testing, as well as product safety testing as a UL approved laboratory. He then, after this career, Mark joined ANAB, the ANSI National Accreditation Bureau, as an accreditation manager, where he manages a number of our mechanical, electrical, chemical, and other major testing field accredited laboratory. He is a member of the SAE G19 AS6171 subcommittee, where he works with a group to accredit component testing labs that are becoming accredited to ISO 17025, in addition with the support of the University of Maryland CALCE group that provides technical expertise for the AS6171 group. At this point, I'm going to pass the presentation to Mark Farnbaugh, and I will allow him to present.
Thank you, David. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar. I am here to give you a broad overview of AS6171 involving the counterfeit testing of electronics and other electrical componentry that are used in the aerospace and defense industries. It's become obviously very key these days with all the insecurities of products that are being shipped around the world and going into very delicate electronics and equipment, as well as obviously planes and all the other good things that rely on the reliability of good componentry. So we're going to do a brief overview of AS6171 as well as AS6810, which is what drives this this requirement that we're going to discuss today, and give you an understanding, why we're doing the program that we're doing. So we'll go to the next slide. So you want to have we want to have the excuse me, lost my place here. Because of the potential counterfeit electronics in today's world, the defense prime contractors and aerospace companies have been applying the requirement for any provider of electronics that will have been sourced through distributors who can either test AS6170 standards or outsource the testing to laboratories that can perform these tests and inspections through AS6171 / sheets, which are the tests under the AS6171 general standard. So the AS71 General Standard basically discusses how to do the risk assessment and the risk analysis of the components that they are going to test. That's going to include, the size of the lots, how many parts you're going to sample, what types of tests you have to do based on the risk, and so on and so forth, so that the laboratory can provide a certification of the part that they are testing back to the provider of the part, whether or not it's a counterfeit part or not. So that's involved up to 11 different slash sheets or tests that fall under the AS6171 General Standard. Now, with the responsible test laboratory, the RTL, is who is going to be the one that's going to be doing the certification of the parts, either by doing all the testing that's required to certify the parts, or they may do some of the testing and outsource to other accredited laboratories to perform certain tests. Like some laboratories may do the mechanical, the non-destructive type tests, but they don't have the capability to do the electrical testing, so they will farm that out to an RTL that does have that on their scope of accreditation to perform the electrical testing. And they can still then offer then their customer then that certification for those particular components or electrical parts that they're testing. So within the general standard, is required, once again, the responsible test laboratory follow requirements for certifying the lots of electronic components, which includes any outstanding or outsourcing of the testing to other accredited laboratories. So once again, they will receive the parts from a distributor or from some other source. The responsible test laboratory, the RTL, then will then get the information on the components that they're testing. They will then fill out the risk assessment and the required tests and provide a quote back to the customer, who then will then sign off on that. And that's what is provided to the laboratory then to perform tests to assure the certification of the parts that they're testing. So once again, if you go into the AS6171 standard, there are tables within that general standard which talk about the risk and the type of parts. So if they're a high risk component, they get more tests. If they're a low risk component, there's lesser tests, obviously. And so those are all spelled out as far as the risk analysis within the AS6171, which the name for that standard is the Test Method Standard, General Requirements, Suspect / Counterfeit, Electrical, Electronic, and Electromechanical Parts. So it's going to go into, like I said, risk characterization. There's a risk characterization scoring sheet. There's a test sequence document in there as well that shows you how the sequence you're going to do the tests to do the certification of the parts. Once again, a sampling plan, so it spells out based on the type of component or the risk level, it's going to tell you how many parts out of a lot you have to actually sample. It could be anywhere from just several parts to 100%, depending on, once again, between what the standard states and what the customer requires.
Mark, there's a question in the chat asking about the risk characterization sheets. Whether you have an example that you could share or describe.
Yeah, I could describe it here. Hold up here. So a risk, basically, it basically has a category between high, moderate, high, moderate, low, low. And under each of those, it gives a definition. So basically, under high, let's give an example. It says that the supplier is not certified to one of the following quality management systems: AS9100, AS9003, AS9120, or ISO 9001, or the independent distributor has open critical non-compliances or in OASIS, or is listed in SAM or as an excluded party, or is identified by a certification body for any QMS violation, or problem reports under 3.1.2.5.2 issued indicating distribution of counterfeit parts, suspect counterfeit parts, or otherwise misrepresented parts against the supplier in the last 24 months. Self-disclosure of non-conforming materials should not be considered a risk factor or has a poor internal supplier history or no history utilizing the supplier. All the way down lower, it just says the supplier is certified to the following quality management system, AS9120, and no open compliances and OASIS, or has not been identified by the certification body for any QMS violation, or does not appear in SAM as an excluded party, and no problem reports under 3.1.2.5.2. And supplier has been designated as, or supplier has been designated as a responsible supplier and follows the requirements of AS6081. So that's just kind of basically the risk identifiers that's in the standard, the general standard. Does that answer their question? Time being. And then there's a score weight between 70 for high, 50 for moderate high, 30 for moderate low, and 10 for low. That's how it's scored.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark.
Welcome. Thank you. Okay, so with the AS6171 now, it is required that if you're going to have those test methods on your scope, that under the AS6810, which is we are signatory on as ANAB, and help develop that to where the requirement under AS6810, that there must be at least a level 2 or higher individual that's part of the accreditation body that will review or observe the tests that are on the scope for the AS6171 slash sheets. So basically, the accreditation is like ANAB, and then provide a 17025 accreditation. Under 17025, that covers the quality management system. So anybody that's not familiar with 17025, that's the standard for requirements for being accredited for a testing or calibration laboratory. It's been around for a long time. The latest revision came out in 2017. And within that standard, it covers all the quality management system requirements. So structural, technical, everything that's covered under what's needed to be an accredited laboratory. So if you're not familiar with 17025, it talks about how you're going to manage the laboratory, how you're going to manage your training, how you're going to manage all the technical aspects of the laboratory, as well as the quality requirements within the standard. And so that's what the laboratories are assessed to from a quality and technical standpoint under 17025, as well as per the AS6171 general requirements, which there is a separate checklist that we also evaluate the lab to make sure that the general requirements of AS6171 are being met. And we'll talk about that here in a second. So basically, under the 17025, there's resource requirements, process requirements, and management system requirements. They're all assessed, and those requirements all must be met in order to gain accreditation to ISO 17025. And accreditation by requirements, once again, AS6810, AS6810 is the standard in which is now required for the accreditation bodies to meet as far as accrediting laboratories with AS6171 slash sheets or test methods on their scope. Once again, the technical expert must be at least a level 2 trained person in AS6171 test methods. So currently we're working through CLACE, which is an advanced engineering group in the University of Maryland, in which it's a think tank where there are people there along with industry developing these AS6171 slash sheets or tests for the industry. So like I said, there's currently 11 of them that have been developed and are currently being used for testing componentry to AS6171. You know, the level 2 is based on the requirements within AS6171 as to what the level of training is, and that's specified within the AS6171 general standard. So getting back to the 17025 accreditation process. So once again, people that are new to this, is that we're an accreditation body, like there are a number of them out there. We're one of the larger accreditation bodies. Is that you will submit an application to our business development people stating as to what tests you'd like to have in your scope, what type of business you are. You can provide that application then to them. It gets then sent on to us, or specifically with this process to me, to review and determine, what we're going to need to quote this particular accreditation based on the size of the scope. After that is done, then we go on to the document submission and review that the laboratory will provide ANAB all the documentation for meeting the requirements of ISO 17025 and ANAB requirements. So we provide a checklist to you with all the required documentation that has to be provided up front and reviewed then by the assigned assessor or qualified assessor, which then leads to, once that is done and the initial document review is complete and everything looks good, then it goes on to the initial accreditation assessment. And the initial accreditation assessment is just that. We come in with the qualified lead assessor who will then review and assess all of the documentation and all the items that are required to meet the requirements of 17025 and ANAB requirements. Once that is done, and on top of that, there will be, with this particular process, there's also going to be a secondary checklist, and that's the AS6171 checklist, general standard checklist, which is handled by the technical expert. And that documentation will be done at the same time. So once that is done, the package then is sent then to, the assessor then will review any corrective actions for any nonconformances that were found. It then comes to ANAB, where there is an internal review by me. It goes out to an outside reviewer for a technical review, and it comes back in then to ANAB, where the Senior Director of Accreditation will then review and provide an accreditation decision at that point in time. And then we start then a 2-year accreditation process. So it's a 2-year cycle. So the first year, like I said, is the initial accreditation assessment, followed by the second year is a surveillance assessment. The third year would be a reassessment, because then at that point in time, the accreditation is expiring. So it's a reassessment, followed by then another surveillance assessment. So that's how the cycle continues. So it's a 2-year cycle as you go forward. The technical expert's role is, really quite simple. It's just as it sounds, to observe technical competency of the laboratory's test personnel and the acceptability of the required test equipment to conduct the AS6171 slash sheet. So this technical expert, like I said, it's a person that's out of that CALS department, the University of Maryland, who is very familiar and helps develop the methods and the standards. And they come into the laboratory, they observe the tests, they observe the people conducting the tests, they observe the test equipment, make sure it's traceable, make sure it's, it's applicable, and then, obviously writes up all their observations of either competency or lack of competency, if there is such a thing, observed. And then go through that AS6171 general standard checklist, which is all the requirements in the general standard that must be met. So nonconformance findings can be written against that as well. So besides 17025, any AS6171 general standard requirements that are not being met, that's also non-conformance, which would have to be addressed with a corrective action. So going back to the technical expert's role, they then will observe tests. They'll be through an interview process, an observation process, reviewing documentation, reviewing whatever test instructions they have. They're going to be reviewing everything, looking at training records, and then obviously once again making sure the equipment is functioning the way it's supposed to function to provide the measurement that they're looking for. A lot of these tests, for those not aware, are not collecting data. It's a visual or go, no go, or pass fail based on a visual assessment, whether it be looking at marking, whether markings that are easily removed, or x-raying a component through its body to make sure that the electronics look as they're supposed to. The laboratories provided drawings of the circuitry, so they compare and make sure the circuitry matches then the drawings, so that it's usually the first way if something is counterfeit, because the circuitry do not match up with the drawings, and so on and so forth. So those are the things that are being looked at by the technical expert, and he then works in concert with the lead assessor to provide his information based on the observations and the checklist for the AS6171 to the lead assessor, which is then presented to the laboratory at the end of an assessment activity. The tests that are currently under the AS6171 standard, is 11 of them have been developed. So those are, and I'll read off what those are. Bear with me here. So the AS6171 /1 is suspect / counterfeit test evaluation method, which is the overall description of a test method or a testing of a component to determine whether it is counterfeit. AS6171 /2 is the techniques for a suspect of counterfeit EEE parts, detection by external visual inspection, remarking and resurfacing, and surface texture analysis test methods. So once again, those are the markings, the surface of the component that's being tested. /3 would be the X-ray fluorescence testing of a component. /4 would be the delidding or decapsulation or for physical analysis of the component. /5 is the detection by radiological test methods. /6 is the acoustic microscopy or AM test methods. /7 is all electrical testing that's conducted. Typically, these are all done through automated electrical testing because of the many components they have to test. So there's typically custom equipment that's being used to do automated electrical testing of the components. /8 is the Raman spectroscopy test method. /9 is the Fourier transfer infrared spectroscopy or FTIR. /10 is the thermogravimetric analysis or TGA test methods. And /11 is detection by design recovery test methods. So those are the current methods or /sheets that fall under the AS61 general standard and are being used currently by laboratories around the world to determine whether or not componentry is counterfeit based on these methods. So those are all separate documents. Those documents, if you are going to get accredited, will all have to be purchased through SAE, and your people in the laboratory have to be trained to these /sheets as per the requirements of 17025 and AS6171.
Mark, there's a
Yes.
question that came in a couple minutes ago.
Okay.
There's a question that, do I need to purchase a copy of the AS6810 that you mentioned a few slides back?
Yes, those are all documents that are controlled and owned by SAE, so they would have to purchase them. And yeah, it gives the requirement that I stated, which means for us as an accreditation body, we have to use a level 2 or higher AS6171 trained person to be part of the assessment process to evaluate competency of the test personnel.
Okay, so in addition to purchasing the 17025 and the AS6171, they'd need to purchase a copy of the AS6810.
Yeah, I recommend it. If they're not familiar with it, they should definitely purchase it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay, so we discussed earlier the AS61 General Standard Checklist. So this particular document was put together by ANAB and approved by the SAE G19 AS6171 subcommittee. Basically, it is a general requirements checklist that is required to be filled out, showing that the laboratory is meeting all the general requirements as stated in the AS61 general standard. And that was a pet peeve that was driven by the subcommittee. The subcommittee, particularly the primes, they were concerned about the everybody being looked at the same way. Want to make sure that they're all meeting the AS6171 general standard requirements, and it's documented. So that's why we do that checklist. So once we do the initial assessment and we fill out that checklist the initial first time, then it'll just be reviewed then at each subsequent assessment activity to ensure it's updated and everything is still being met. And that's done by, once again, the technical expert. That's, just want to let you know that there's, more to it than just the 17025, which has its own large checklist. But this is also included in part of the AS6171 Counterfeit Electronics program that we sponsor. And once again, it's a 4-page checklist, and it's provided to the laboratory prior to the assessment activity so that they can see and make sure that they're meeting those requirements. Most of these laboratories, obviously, they're already into doing this testing. They're aware of it, but once again, it is a way for us to be able to make sure that those requirements that are in the standard are being met and verified during the assessment activity. And once again, it's followed up by the technical expert, who is the one that has the experience under the AS6171 general standard. Here is an example of an ANAB certificate. What it looks like, you can see in here, if it's kind of small, it says AS6170 Detection Suspect / Counterfeit Parts Accreditation Program on top of the ISO 17025 2017 accreditation. So the certificate of accreditation. This is what it'll look like if you are looking to get accredited. Once you get accredited, this is what we provide you, a certificate. Next page, this is what the scope of accreditation looks like. So this is the scope of accreditation that goes with that certificate. The back page is actually the first page of the title page, which lists the name of the laboratory. And also this blur in here shows that the actual, the top of the page actually talks about meeting the requirements of the AS6171 general standard general requirements. And then you can see within the scope, you can see in the second column under the specification standard, it lists all the AS6171s and other standards, because the laboratories can do it to other standards as well, and internal procedures that are listed in there. So that's what the scope and certificate would look like once you gain your accreditation. And so it lists everything, including the type of products that you're going to be testing, Any key equipment or technology that you're using are also listed, as well as the first column, which states then the actual test that's being conducted. So that's what the end product looks like once you get accredited. And those
Mark,
are
there's a question
yes.
on this scope that there is a /2 and a /4 represented on this sheet. Does that mean this certificate is limited only to those /2 and /4?
Where are they seeing that at?
I'm looking, I see it under the specification column. There's a /2. It appears to be in the first
Yeah.
3 and then a /4 in the bottom.
Right. Those are the different tests. So /4 is the decapsulation and dye verification, and /2 is under the electrical test. So they're doing multiple electrical tests. That's why they have the /2 in a couple of spots, because the tests that they're using is doing electrical related tests. Does that answer their question?
It appears to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So any other questions on the scope or certificate? Once again, I just wanted to bring that for those that are not accredited as to what it looks like, as to what you're paying for. And this is also published on the ANAB website, so that anybody that is in need of your services can contact you and through our website, or get your contact information, and based on what your scope content will provide them as a service. So in conclusion here, we have the ISO 17025 accreditation is required by the AS6171 standard. That is, it's in the AS6171 standard, as well as reiterated in the AS6810. There must be a level 2 or better technical expert required for the assessment process. So that's why we've incorporated a gentleman out of the University of Maryland, Kels engineering group, that works and helps develop these standards, or these slash sheets and test methods. So they're very knowledgeable of what is in the laboratory as far as what they need to see to determine competency in doing the tests under AS6171.
Mark, does that mean that for each laboratory that is accredited to this, that they have to have a level 2 individual on site, or is that just someone for oversight?
No, they do not have to have a level 2. That they have to have trained personnel that are at least some type of training, where it be level 1 or not, to conduct the testing. So once again, that's in their training records, which is observed during that, and it's stated as to how you attain the levels of training within the AS6171 general standard. But it's, once again, the training records are observed by the technical expert as well as the lead assessor, to assure that they have had the sufficient training for the AS6171 slash sheets. And then once again, the checklist assist the laboratory, and assessor ensure requirements are met. So that's why we use the checklist, so that all the requirements are being observed, and that they are being met, and that they have, all of those details reviewed during the assessment process. So once again, the requirements must be met, or nonconformances are written by the lead assessor and or the technical expert when requirements are not being met, and then must be followed up on by a corrective action with objective evidence to the assessor, and then ultimately to ANAB to approve. So basically that is my presentation. Like I said, it's a broad overview. I was hoping to kind of stir more questions that people may have, particularly if they're new to the accreditation process.
Mark, there's a note here under Miss Ann Puncheri. I don't know if she wants to ask a question right now. I will unmute her.
Okay.
Ann, you are unmuted.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was an accident.
That's okay. Thank you.
Hi, Ann.
Hi.
Okay. There are a couple questions here in the chat, and I want to give everyone the idea here. List of our webcasts, our webinars, blogs that we have on information, and also resources for training that we have here. So let's move on to the questions portion. There's a question that came in about 3 minutes ago, Mark, and it talks about you mentioned someone cannot have misrepresented parts in the last 24 months. What does that mean?
Well, I mean, are they talking about going back to the risk? Is that what they're referring to?
I'm guessing so, yes.
Okay, so that has to do with, once again, that let me go back to that section.
Do you need us to go back on the screen?
No, I'm looking back on my on the general standard here.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. Okay, so under the high risk category, it says under problem report. So once again, this is define the risk level for the supplier based on past experience, not the laboratory, the supplier. One of the things that makes them and puts them at high risk is problem reports under 3.1.2.5.2 issued indicating distribution of counterfeit parts, suspect counterfeit parts, or otherwise misrepresented parts against the supplier in the last 24 months. Self-disclosure of non-conforming material should not be considered a risk factor. So once again, if the supplier of the component has sold misrepresented parts or has distributed counterfeit parts within the past 24 months, then they are a high risk supplier. And they have a high score then based on the supplier risk table here. Excuse me. Does that answer their question?
I think so. There's also a question here. The tests that you've listed labs can be accredited to that and not be accredited to the AS6171. Is that correct?
AS6171 is the program. All the general requirements of AS6171 must be met in order for the AS6171 slash sheets to be put on the scope of accreditation, period.
Okay. And there is a related question here asking about what it means for it to be a slash sheet. I think what they're trying to ask is why is it called a slash sheet?
Because it's a slash followed by a number after AS6171. So that's just the way that the committee put it together to borne out the test methods out of the AS6171 general standard.
Okay.
That's what we call slash sheets. That's just a common term. It's used, for a number of different things in our industry.
Okay. Okay. And one last question here was that does the use of AS6171, does it impact us on a daily basis?
Well, you have to meet the requirements of AS6171 continually. I mean, that's got, it's just like 17025. I mean, you have to live it. You have to live that standard as once you're accredited to it. I mean, you have to follow the requirements daily when conducting testing under a 17025 accreditation and with the AS6171 standard as part of the AS6171 counterfeit testing program.
Okay. Mark, that's been very informative. Are there any more questions? I'm not seeing any there. If you need more information on this, here are two email addresses that you can ask for information on training or information on accreditation services, training at anab.org and anab@anab.org. So again, I would like to thank Mark for being such a informative presenter and for sharing his time with us. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, everyone.
We will end
Oh, I see
the.
we have another. We have another chat question there.
Do we? Okay. Okay, here we go. First one. Question: does the accreditation cover international test bodies, especially in Africa?
Of course, we cover worldwide.
I think that's it in the chat. Sorry, I missed the question and questions in the chat.
It just popped up. It just popped
Okay.
up. Yeah, we do accreditations worldwide, so that's not an issue. So we're, obviously with their long distances, a lot of it will be done remotely versus coming on site. So that's how we handle the overseas type of accreditations.
Okay, Mark, there is another question in the chat that I missed earlier, and
Okay.
it asks, is that a class 2 across all disciplines of testing?
I guess that would require, yes, all testing. Once again, that's any type of slash sheet, they'll have to be at least a level 2 or higher to be able to assess the laboratory for competency.
Okay. All right, I don't see any further questions. Mark, again, thank you for such an informed presentation. We appreciate you lending your time to us today.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
All right, everyone, have a nice afternoon. This concludes our webinar on AS6171.